Hi there, I'm Dave Householder, and I'm blessed to be coming to you from Huntington Beach Central Park here among the eucalyptus trees. It's a beautiful day in Southern California, and I'm here to encourage you from the Bible. And I'm going to be talking to you about Hebrews chapter 11. Now, this is kind of funny, but it's the go to chapter if you're ever asked to preach and you haven't prepared. In other words, if you show up in church someday, maybe you're on vacation, you show up at this church, and the pastor, for whatever reason, isn't there. The pastor's sick, or the supply preacher didn't show up, or whatever, which happens sometimes. And they all point at you and they say, "Could you preach for us?" Go to Hebrews 11 because it just is a sermon that writes itself. And if you can't preach from Hebrews 11, you can't preach at all. It's called by faith. By faith, Abraham did this. By faith, Abel did that. And it's a whole list of the Mount Rushmore of people who did things by faith when they were facing difficult times. And the Bible was written in difficult times. You may say, well, what does the Bible have to do with this pandemic and everything else we're going through? Well, it has an awful lot to do with that because nobody just sat down and said, hey, I'm just going to write a book of the Bible. No, they were responding to challenges like COVID-19, invasions, plagues, slavery, horrible stuff, persecution, and they were responding to problems and issues. And the writer of Hebrews, we think it might have been Paul, we're not quite sure, but the writer of Hebrews is working with people here who are having trouble with their faith. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done a whole chapter on faith to encourage people. And he uses vivid examples of these fantastic people who lived by faith. And it starts out so profoundly here. This is verse 1. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the convictions of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. And then it launches into by faith, Abel did this, by faith, Abraham did that, and so on and so forth. It is a fantastic passage. Let me say a couple things about faith and the mind of the ancient Hebrew people. The Hebrew people, in their language, didn't have past, present, and future. Now, that's hard for you and me to understand because our language has past, present, future. I went to the park, I'm at the park, I'm going to go to the park, that kind of thing. The Hebrew language had two tenses, finished and unfinished, not past, present, and future, finished and unfinished. And things are in process or they're completed. And faith is what the writer is saying here is seeing the incomplete and praying into the complete. In other words, if you're sick, the complete would be that you're healthy and strong and happy. And so you pray into the completed sense, not away from the incomplete sense. You don't pretend like you're not in the incomplete sense because we have a lot of things that are just on our to-do list forever, and we never really get around to it. We never really finish things in this life. But we want to lean into the completed, lean into the perfect, lean into those things. If you're having trouble with money, leaning into abundance. If you're having trouble with your health, leaning into strength and mobility and those things. If you're having a hard time with your relationships, leaning into intimacy and connection with people. If you're in the wrong job, doing the wrong thing, leaning into a profession and a vocation that would fully use your gifts and give you a lot of joy, and you'd go there even if you weren't paid, that kind of thing. Leaning into good stuff. So during the time of the pandemic, leaning into a time of prosperity and joy and regathering with people and living with our hearts into that. And that is the essence of faith. By faith, it says here, by faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain. And down here, by faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear, constructed an ark. Verse 8, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in a land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even though she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. So faith, folks, is living into the completed sense, living into the positive, living into the finished. And it's not denying that we have problems, but it's putting our heart in the solutions. And if we can put our heart in the solutions rather than wallow in the fear of what's going on, it doesn't say here by fear these people reacted and got all nervous. There's a lot of fear going around. And I think the fear is actually more contagious than the virus. The virus is real, but the fear seems like it's damaging people even more. We don't want to live by fear. This chapter doesn't talk about people living by fear. It says living by faith. And these are people having trouble, people having challenges, just like you and me. So I challenge you today, if you're running into a hard time with something, think of it in the completed sense, fulfilling God's promise, live into that, and we can have a lot of joy even when we're living in an incomplete and broken world. That's the good news for today, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.